Like one of those.
Right. All right, excuse me. I'm gonna call our meeting to order for the special Board of Education meeting in open session. We have a few minutes to approve, and then just for setting the stage for tonight, we are really focusing on kind of our roles and the purpose of community engagement related to referendum 2024. So this is a bit of our orientation and also being able to come up with our ways of talking about the referendum and celebrating the work of the last referendum in 2020. All right, to get us going, let me get to the first set of minutes. I move to approve the minutes from the special meeting and open session dated July 18th, 2023.
Second, Nikki Vandermeer.
All right, any questions or comments on the minutes? All those in favor of approving the minutes? Aye.
Aye.
All right.
Aye.
And Megan, your advisory vote. Thank you. That passes with all of us. I move to approve the minutes from the special meeting in open session dated October 17th, 2023.
Second.
Thank you, Board Member Castro. Any comments or questions on the minutes? All right, seeing none, all those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Back here. Aye.
Thank you, Maya. Megan, your advisory vote? Aye. All right, thank you. That passes, all of us. And lastly, I move to approve the minutes from the special meeting in open session dated October 30th, 2023.
Second.
Thank you, Board Member Castro. Any questions or comments? Seeing none, all those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
All right. And Megan, your advisory vote. All right. Thank you. That passes as well with everyone. And with that, I will turn it on over to whoever's gonna lead us in our conversation tonight.
Thank you, everyone. Okay, well, thanks, everyone. Thank you again for taking another evening with us to come together around our referendum work over tonight. Our goal is to have a number from our team share with you in advance of our engagement schedule that we have out there now that's been communicated with the public. To also give you an understanding of the information that we are going to present. Of course, we've also asked board members to sign up to join us to the greatest extent possible that you're able to for this schedule.
Yes.
Okay, so the agenda for tonight again is for us to go over the overview of the roles at the community engagement sessions. Again, understanding that we are there, administration is there, present information, facts, board is there in multi-roles, of course, your role as board members, but also advocates for the purpose of the referendum as well. And that there may be a little bit, there may be space in meetings to do a little bit of each, but know that that's our role as administration. We want to be able to review the budget and referendum. They are related, and there's a lot of information in terms of sometimes it's hard for the general public to think about the budget right now as they know how right now for the school year. But our job, and of course, our advocacy for this referendum is to look at a long-range sustainable plan for the finances of that list. So it's really important that we establish where we are, where we're going to go, and how the referendum would benefit that. We also want to celebrate the 2020 referendum. Of course, that is going to be in real time Friday, as we have the ribbon cuttings at 4 schools from 10 o'clock until 2 o'clock, or 10:30 until 2 o'clock that afternoon. We'll have a great time having 4 comprehensive high school ribbon cuttings. We'll have some time for discussion, and then, of course, next steps. tonight is a great night for you to ask questions that you have so that you feel comfortable and confident as we approach our community in these discussions. I do think at some point tonight, I'll make sure that we talk about when we get to that point in these sessions, there are times where you may be pressed or we may be pressed to answer questions that we don't have the exact answer to. So I do think we have to think about this in a real adaptive way. Of course, we will be in buildings that are scheduled as part of the referendum for the facilities and others that aren't. We are going to be in places in the community where they feel seen and heard with our work. And we'll be in other places where maybe that isn't the experience for the parents or community members that are there. So we have to be prepared, and many of you know this because you've been on this campaign trail before, if you will. But we do have to be prepared for all. Our job is to present a factual, confident, trust-building engagement with our community around this really important work that we're doing. So thanks to all of you who put this together tonight, Jesse, Amy, Adele, in communications, Bob, the finance information, and all of you for being here. So with that, I'll turn it over to Amy is next.
Thank you.
Just do the arrows.
There we go. No worries. All right, Dr. I've covered a lot of this already, but as a reminder, the goals of our open community session and our facilities community session are really to build trust and collaboration with open communication with our community. So with those goals, the key objectives we will hopefully achieve through these goals are building trust and transparency, addressing concerns and questions, educating community, and demonstrating accountability, which will also collect data and feedback from our community, which we will present for at the completion of these. So there's several different roles at these. We have the community have their role. They are there to be informed and to provide feedback. We have our Board of Education members, which are there to listen and observe and collaborate and communicate with our community. Our principals will be at the facility sessions. They will also be there to engage with their communities to really help foster good conversation and to ensure that all the families are present and are heard. And then there will also be MMSD central office staff, and we will be there to help inform and to provide data and information for people to be able to make their best judgment when it comes to the referendum. All right, I'm going to skip to the next one. You guys have heard this before, and I don't have any buttons today, and I'm very sorry. But hopefully you still have your buttons. So you are already ambassadors. And as ambassadors, I'm just going to do that simple reminder of do's and don'ts. So do encourage folks to come to these sessions. Do encourage folks to vote. Don't be specific and advocate for what they can vote for. Don't tell them you have to support the referendum, vote yes or no. Our job really is to inform them and give them all the information to be able to make their best judgment. We cannot use district resources or facilities or district staff's time to advocate for the referendum. We also cannot, we can use facilities, but we can't use facilities in a preferential way. So ensuring that we are utilizing our staff and resources to inform and not to advocate. And I think we had a good discussion, lively discussion last time we were together around what that means for board members. There's a little bit more of some leeway for you all as you are out in the public, but as you're acting as a board member in that capacity, at meetings and whatnot, we're doing our best just to inform. That is all I have for do's and don'ts. You guys have any questions around the do's and don'ts again? No? All right. And I'm going to pass it off to Bob, who will be covering the budget. Favorite.
Oh, hey, everybody. So the referendum, been talking to a couple different groups about the referendum. And I think it's important for us to put it in the context of the referendum is a natural progression of all your work, not only the past year, but years before, right? So the 24-25 budget goals, as always, our budgets at the school level, we'll start with revenues. We identify how many dollars we have, how many ongoing sustainable revenues.
Hello?
Oh, okay.
You gotta hold it closer.
Okay. I don't like these things. I want to get a little better. Can you put that in? TJ, don't you got some pull with the extra department? No. That's a lie. Okay, we'll talk later. All right. I want to talk about our budget goals for 24-25. In school finance, it's all about revenues. We've been talking about sustainable revenues, matching our ongoing program costs to support our schools. I think it's real important when we focus on our goals. We're not going to read the goals, but our goals really starting out is to continue to invest in high quality staff, diverse workforce, and develop the programs that we have in terms of equity, focus on K-4 education, early literacy, continuing to invest in class sizes, maintaining the staff, really a focus in terms of the future where the money is going. I think the board has done a great job the last few years talking about retooling and refocusing our efforts to close opportunity gaps. And really the questions are an extension of us trying to have sufficient revenues ongoing to continue the investments that have already been made, right? Commitment to the excellence. So that's where it starts in terms of grounding in context. We're gonna show a video that explains school finance in an overview fashion. See if we can get this to work. I struggle with this.
Yes.
Our public schools are the cornerstone of our community. The education and opportunities we provide for students today shape their futures and ours. Schools, like any organization, need money to operate. But in Wisconsin, funding the needs of our schools has been a growing challenge. State policy limits how much school districts can spend. The vast majority of school funding comes from a combination of state dollars and local property taxes. It's called the revenue limit, and it acts as a cap per student that school districts can spend each year. Even if school costs go above this level, schools can't spend any more than this limit. From 1994 to 2009, these revenue caps were adjusted for inflation, which meant they helped schools keep up with ongoing needs. But since 2010, the resources districts need to survive have fallen farther and farther behind the basic costs to operate our schools. By the end of 2025, the revenue limit will have fallen more than $3,300 per student behind inflation. In the Madison Metropolitan School District, with roughly 25,000 students, that's a decrease of more than $82 million. What's more, each district has a different revenue cap, and these caps are not tied to the needs of the students or the costs to the schools that serve them. Our job as a school district is to make sure all of our students have access to the exceptional educational opportunities we provide, no matter what their needs when they walk through our doors. But state funding falls short of what it costs to meet the specific needs of many of our students. When that happens, we have to use money from our general fund to cover the difference, which means taking dollars from other important needs. The largest portion of our budget goes towards staffing. Our people are the heart of our schools. Without enough educators who instruct, support, and inspire learning, schools can't provide the lessons, programs, and opportunities our students deserve. Other important budget items include curriculum, technology, transportation, operations, and maintenance. We work hard to balance our budgets, yet resources for schools have been shrinking year after year since 2010. With costs growing faster than funding, districts are always looking for ways to trim costs and work smarter, like deferring needed school maintenance, cutting programs, reducing staff, and many other strategies. But schools can only cut so much before they start to harm educational opportunities for their students. To maintain class sizes, keep up with rising costs, take care of school buildings, and protect high-quality instruction, many districts have turned to their community to help fill the state-imposed funding gap. Since the arrival of revenue limits, over 80% of school districts have done so by asking local voters to raise their caps through an operational referendum. Most have used the option multiple times. Our children don't have time to wait for state policymakers to fix the school funding system. By putting the needs of our students first, we are investing in their potential and the future of our whole community. Strong schools make strong communities where families want to move and stay. Learn more about school funding by visiting our website.
Okay.
Is that a video? Go to
Okay,
slide and it starts.
so that was the specific of school funding. There's a couple of important things I like about the video that kind of drive home the point we're on. And it kind of a reminder of where we are with our revenues. We talk about property taxes and state aid in Madison Metropolitan School District for us. About 90% of our dollars come from the property tax, and about 10% come from state aid. So when revenue limits that are unique to our district, where we always talk about revenue limits in terms of starting school finance for Madison, it's about 90% property taxes and 10% state aids. So we're really reliant on that property tax. The other important part of this, that 4-minute video, is to talk about the need to go to referendum. Madison, our community has been very supportive of public schools and have historically supported referendums to exceed revenues, both for operations and facilities. And so I like to think about it simply as the state law says, we are underfunding public schools during the state commitment. And if school boards feel they need ongoing revenues, they need to go to referendum. So going to referendum is a natural consequence of state law, and the state not coming up, from my perspective, a fair share of dollars in terms of sharing. But the solution is referendum, which you have done. Talking a little bit about where we are at, even with the referendums that have historically been passed. The last 2 years, 23, 24, and this year projected 24, 25, our revenue limits in Madison are $30.2 million behind when we adjust that revenue to inflation. Just like our costs are adjusted to inflation, sustainable ongoing revenues are short $30.2 million last year and this year. We also talk about the commitment to provide children with the education and services they need when they need it, specifically when we talk about the federal IDEA, Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. Important federal and state law mirrors that federal law, requiring us to provide the services that children need in terms of individualized education programs. Very important. You all know Madison does a great job implementing the federal and state laws, but it has a cost to it, and the state and federal government, in this case, we're going to focus on the state, provides about 31% in terms of the reimbursement of those costs that we incur every year.
And the feds have never paid more than 17%, even though they promised as much as a 40% reimbursement in 1973 and they've never paid.
All right, and I think it's like somewhere in the 10 or 13% right now when we're sitting in terms of Madison.
It's at 11, right?
Yep, exactly. So by doing that, we, this year, 23-24, $66.4 million. We took from our general pot of revenues that we have to support the school system and needed to cover those costs for those students that we provided, which is very important. Students, special needs and the programming that they deserve and that we provide. But it creates a budget shortfall, right? Creates a revenue gap. Statewide, that gap is equivalent to $1.5 billion. This is a topic that is well known. We'll continue to work with the legislature to talk about that underfunding. And then finally, and it's a tough one. As we know, we're focused on 4-year-old kindergarten and early education. State law treats a 4-year-old kindergarten as half a student. Clearly we have and are focusing on expanding all-day 4-year-old kindergarten, which is a full day of cost for a 1.0 child, but state law says they're only worth 0.5 under revenue limits and under state aid. So that's also another method of state law underfunding or creating revenue gaps for us that we deal with. I think this is a real important fact. Deferring maintenance is one way. The video talked about schools can cut some costs. You all have been doing a really good job at investing not only our general fund dollars in the maintenance, but specifically levying a property tax that is reserved only for maintenance and ongoing costs in our facilities. $5 million is in this budget, has been $5 million the last several budgets. Cumulative since 2008. The boards have historically levied $93 million to invest in our facilities. That's a lot of money, but it's nowhere near what we need on an ongoing basis to maintain our facilities. And more importantly, to keep them to the level of the need that they have, right? We'll talk about the schools in terms of the revenues are there, but 26 of our schools are over 60 years old, which means they're just past their useful life. A couple articles in the paper this last week talk about some of our buildings that were built in 1928. They still have boilers that are in operation, and that's not unique just to one school building. We literally have to have parts made specifically because the manufacturers no longer support the pieces of equipment. Keep this building moving in terms of the mechanicals with the HVAC and heating and ventilation. In addition, our facility condition report, just as a reminder, 40 of our schools, C or D in terms of that rating. And we're gonna focus on the schools that are gonna be part of the referendum in a little bit. Right now, Jen, who is not able to be here in physical presence, but here virtually, is gonna talk about community engagement. Jen, are you there?
I am. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you perfect.
All right. Thank you for letting me join virtually. I am sorry I can't be there in person, but I'm sure you don't want me there because I'll spread COVID to y'all. So we had 14 community sessions across the city in the last year. And from those, we had 10 that were input sessions, 3 that were superintendent advisory group meetings, and a community leader think tank. From all of those, and in addition to that, we had over 4,000 survey responses from our community about what they wanted to see and their thoughts on the referendum. What we heard was one, that staffing is a priority. So the community expressed clearly that staffing was a priority, especially around staff retention, compensation, and working conditions. They also had noted that the focus on school culture and climate and reducing class sizes was important. The community also wanted to know whether we should be renovating or building new. They wanted to know more. They wanted to know more about what our buildings are currently, what spaces are best suited to renovate, and what spaces maybe would be better starting fresh. We focused on the middle schools, as you all know, which was promised in the last referendum, with the addition of completing our high schools. The community also talked a lot about flexible learning spaces as an interest. And finally, the final theme we heard from them was that they wanted a comfortable learning environment. So on days like today, when it's a little warm outside, air conditioning, heating, ventilation, those are all important things for facility improvements that our community was interested in. Bob, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thanks, Jen. Now we'll be coming back when we get a little bit further down, but now we want to spend a little bit of time. Spend a little bit of time now talking a little bit more about the specifics of the referendum. Okay, so this is a tie back to the goals in terms of 24-25, which were consistent goals really from the last couple of years in terms of the focus of where you've been leading the district and the community in terms of our investment. So the first question is, let's look at the 25 budget and it'll say, are you just maintaining your continuing operations? That's partially true, but it's clearly not the whole story. We're talking about sustainable revenues. We're talking about having revenues on an ongoing basis to meet the investments and the commitments that you've already made in the areas of retention of high quality staff. Continuing to invest in 4K, full day 4K, expanding multilingual education, and then in terms of the work about fostering well-rounded opportunities that focus on the middle schools. So I think it's real important to stress it's an investment and it's a commitment to the excellence that you've already done. Without sustainable revenues, we cannot maintain and we cannot continue the investments you have made. And so I think that's a real important point to say. We're talking about sustainable revenues, not one-time revenues to get us through this year, but to continue to the future. So on the operations side, it's $100 million. We're asking it, scaffolding it up over a period of 4 years, beginning with $30 million potential. This is a request, right? A maximum of an additional $30 million in taxing authority for this fall, followed by $30 million the fall of 25, and then 20 million in 26, and an additional 20 million in 27 for a total of $100 million. Starting out, the estimated monthly impact this year in the fall of 24 would be $26. When fully realized 4 years out in 27, 28, that monthly impact becomes $87. So that's the dollar impact on the average Madison home in terms of the city of Madison. In terms of the operating reference.
Hey, Bob.
Yeah.
The question, have we figured out the amounts for Fitchburg yet?
That's an almost impossible task. So Amy, after I was telling her, we gotta just put a little footnote on that tax calculator to say city of Madison residents. It's there, yeah. I was asking if we had been able to figure out for Fitchburg.
Do you think we will be as we're going through this process?
Because I can pull out my book and check. Madison, the city of Madison is about 90% of our space, and then there's six or seven other municipalities that create 50%. So most of the tax bill for resident Pittsburgh school district, right? So it would be taking that tax bill and breaking it down what they're going to get, and then reallocating a portion to it. It would be a very complicated process. Get it on the web and verify it. Yeah, that's where we're at.
But there will be some
Yes.
residents who attend.
Yes. Okay, I'll bring you the questions on that.
I don't have a question about that, but as you're gonna start to talk about choosing the schools, one of the questions that I think is coming out in the public fairly often is, why are some of the schools that we're choosing not at full capacity right now? And so I'm hoping that you'll weave the answer to that into what you're about to talk about. Thank you.
Yes, we will definitely talk about that.
We'll talk about it. I think it's a very good question, and
We got a very good story to tell about how it all fits together, right? Okay, you want to talk about that now, since you brought it up? Why not, right? Okay, so, and Wisconsin Policy Forum put it out, and they first Well, they were the first ones that were, I think, more public about it, right? And this is based on information we shared in the long range facilities plan, right? So we've been talking about the population and the capacities of our schools. And so just to get everybody on the same page, when you look at our schools and you look at grading capacity and how we're staffed at each one of the schools, middle schools are generally schools that have the most space, right? That's a fact. And so the referendum, the way I explain the facilities referendum question, really, I start with the 2020 referendum. The board and the conversations with the community at the time when we did our 2020 referendum, focus on the 4 comprehensive high schools, Capitol High, the need to build a new Southside Elementary School. That was the focus. Then the conversations were, when we come back, we want to focus on the remaining high school, Shabazz, and then we're going to shift our work, our next phase to our facilities investment to middle schools, right? High schools, middle schools, and then 10 to the elementary schools. And so that's exactly what we did. We started there. Then we did the facility condition report in the fall of 23 and issued that facility condition report. And that's what the screen you're looking at right now. The facility condition report focused on 14 categories. The upper right corner of the square, we see most of these are in the D or F, the D range, are the mechanical plumbing, mechanical HVAC. So middle schools was our focus. Next on the condition of those middle schools, and then some high priority elementary schools. So that was the facility condition. And we came out with the long range facilities plan and really took a bigger list of the 10 that are here. And this is what it is. Then we started putting some dollar amounts on it. And so the decision on the schools that we picked and the focus on middle schools is we need to continue to develop middle schools to focus on STEM and the arts and schools that are going to take us into the future. No matter what, we're going to continue to need middle schools. And the focus is on the middle schools that were selected, really because 2 things: the mechanical condition of the buildings, and each one of those sites are located where there's sufficient space to build a new school on the grounds that we currently own. Which then allows us a couple of things, right? It allows us to plan to the future and have spaces if we go in to renovate or build new other schools, to continue to use those spaces if we need to pivot. And then you'll say, but you really haven't talked about we're under capacity at middle schools. We have 12 middle schools today, and we're focusing on 5 of those 12. And so really the idea is we're under capacity or not. We need to begin somewhere with our middle schools. We picked the high priority middle schools geographically located across our district. That's the 507. That's the fall referendum. And we need to work on those middle schools. Now, what the future holds, we don't know. We have a 20-year student enrollment projection coming. We have lost some students. We know we were projected to lose students this year, and we gained over 100 students this year. So those numbers are moving up and down. But the way I look at it is we need to invest in our middle schools, and we need to start somewhere, right? And then we've gotten a lot of questions also on this. Does that mean you're going to close the school or change attendance boundaries? We haven't talked about it, and that's an impossible what if question to answer. Legitimate question, but no answer. My default is the board will, no matter what happens in early November, begin in November, a conversation about the 25-26 budget, which will include looking at available revenues, will include looking at enrollment projections, will include looking at capacities and make decisions. Right? It's all part of a bigger conversation. Does that make any sense?
It does make sense. When we were in one of these many conversations, it was either you or Mike that had brought another element to the conversation. And I'd like to be able to recapture that in my mind. It was something related to not knowing the future of all of our elementary schools, but feeling fairly secure about the locations for our middle schools as population shifted.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, the plan that we have now, the 10 schools are 7 sites, we actually, because I think it helps visualize this period. The map of where the schools are in the 507, in Referendum. So the idea being, the first perspective, I talked about the first two, the actual mechanicals, the actual condition of those buildings, the age, plus geographical location with a focus on middle school. Also, some pretty serious accessibility issues that are gonna be addressed in the middle schools that we. And so the idea being, no matter what the future holds, one, we gave you the numbers in terms of 26 of our schools are over 60 years old. 40 of them have gotten C or D in terms of the condition of the facilities. We need to begin investing in our facilities. We can't wait another 4 years, right? We need to work. And so the buildings that were selected now, I like to say, no matter what happens to our enrollment, if it goes up or if it goes down or pretty much stays the same for the next 40 years, facilities that we have there now, based on the information that we know, are gonna be used and are gonna be invested in. Right? We're gonna need the schools that we have identified. Really, I say, no matter what happens, right? In terms of up 1,000, down 1,000, changes them up. Demographics have shown for probably over 10 years, the population in Madison is going from here to here, right? It is. Our elementary schools, Amana, in this area are at capacity or projected to be near capacity. Right? Our last long range enrollment projections talked about Olson, our more recent school, being full, like pretty much right now, a year from now. It's not, and it's not going to be, but all the projections have been showing the population shifting. Now, we have the report that's coming out and it's looking at all developments. There's a lot of in development going on now. Right up here on the corridor by Oscar Mayer, think of those areas, and out to the north and east, right? Where higher densities are already built and are starting to rent. And so, but that's in the future, right? So the idea is we need these facilities and we need to have modern middle schools, educational standards. And I think you've got a really good plan, I really do. That makes sense?
Yes, thank you.
I can say, I'm gonna say this is my opinion, I can share my opinion. I want to sit down with some of the reporters and explain this, right, this population thing, right? But then, I think they try to make it too simple, right? It's much more, it's always more complicated, but I think it's a real simple story.
People want to know your hot takes.
What was that?
The people want to know your hot takes, your opinions.
You're natural, whenever you talk to me, you're not. I must remind me of myself. Oh.
Can I
Oh,
ask,
okay.
how the land the district purchase factors into this long term? The hope with that purchase was that we would strategically be building where housing is being developed as Madison. There's a real serious projection for the growth of Madison that's pretty inclusive of the city in its entirety, but also includes an area in which there hasn't historically been housing where we'd be in direct kind of for our own students.
You mean the area out west of Wilson? The Acacia Ridge development. The property is there and we did look at that. It was an area where the last long-term enrollment projections had expected more students to be part of that Acacia Ridge development. That development is almost done. We have one more section. I can't remember how many houses are going to go into it. But the students we projected several years ago never materialized, right? And that's part of the update annual, their fine tuning the models they created specifically for us based on what's really happened, right? So that property is there and available for us to use. Also, we have property on Strucker Road to the east. And there could be more development there. But right now, based on what we know, those aren't ready for any new schools to be built. We need to adapt to the that we have right now. We're gonna be looking at those areas, right?
I just wanna be careful because I think this happened with some prayer in terms of the extension of City of Minnesota. And they just ended up building before we did. And so I guess part of my curiosity around that space would be, do we need to be concerned that another district or we do develop the school for that neighborhood will do it before we do?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a legitimate question. I think to answer that really means we need to continually get the data, and the next big piece is enrollment projections. The next big piece is us looking at the capacity of the buildings that we have and where the shifts are going. I mean, I'll say part of the conversations with Van de Waal and our representative on the Madison Plan Commission, there's talk about interchange development out off of 90 and 94, which would make that Sprecher Road property years down the line in the near future. The possibility of more high density development in that area, I think is pretty strong. But that takes years to get off that state system. And I think it's just a matter of if we build new there, what about our existing?
No, I can totally. And I guess the other question would be then, when do you get to the point where you say the district needs to offload these pieces of property because we're not interested in, or we need to use them differently than originally intended?
Yeah, legitimate. Good points. Well, I'm gonna, these were the grades. I just wanted to remind folks that we do have the information on our facility condition report. We also have other slides that break out each one of these that we will have at the sessions coming up in terms of the community input session that start on Thursday. Talked about the map in terms of geographical locations. I also talked a little bit about this, but I think it's really important for us to focus on this. Actually, our work group and Jen who's online, I don't want to forget about Jen and Amy and me and building services and other members of our team. You know, we share this with the community, right? When you look at middle schools, the commitment we've made to middle schools specifically for STEM and the arts for middle school students, the age of middle school students, doesn't usually happen that, right? I mean, a lot of school districts will take an old high school, convert it to the middle school and build a brand new high school and just say, this isn't good enough, right? But your plan is different, right? We are explicitly focusing on middle schools and modernizing the academic classroom and spaces in terms of library and shared spaces and classrooms that meet current academic standards, not only for middle schools, but obviously it will be for Shabazz and the elementary schools that are there. Right. So it's really about not only modernizing, which is critical. Jen talked about this, right? Most of our surveys and public comments, when you say, what do folks want about the facility? It's air conditioning. That's number one. They want air conditioning, right? Which is understandable. But it's about the heating, it's about the ventilation, and it's about the plumbing, right? The infrastructure on all, including the renovation, all that is good. And then I mentioned it's about creating specific spaces, focusing on modern education facilities. So a couple of things about the specifics of the 507 million that I think is not pointed out enough in recent newspapers. Number one, happens to be about the cost of the first year of the operation. And this is the principal and interest payments that will begin to happen once we start selling the bond to finance the payment of the $507 million. It's about $27 a month fully annualized over 20-year bond repayments. But the key is this, there's no tax impact this fall for the facilities referendum. It doesn't begin until the fall of 25, right? So the tax impact that we're gonna ask voters for in the fall is just the $30 million on the operating referendum, which again, I want to stress, it's the boards, the community investment, giving the board the authority to use the 30 million operating in addition to the $507 million. It's an estimate that we have on the cost to build and renovate the 2 elementary schools. And we'll only sell bonds that we need to finance the actual cost. So these are maximum requests in giving us. So the facilities hits the property tax in the fall. Not this. A little bit more on this renovate. I almost want to read the slides, right? Because this is a big conversation in terms of renovate and new. And I've covered a couple of these points to talk about the recommendation that the board agreed to in terms of building new. So the 2 schools on the list for renovation are Anna Crestwood. And that recommendation was for a combination of things. One, we had done some considerable front end work the last couple of years on Crestwood and some other priority elementary schools in terms of spending time in building, working with architectural firms. So we have pretty good plans in place already for those 2 elementary schools. The idea being, with the renovation dollars, you can extend the useful life of the facilities themselves to 25 to 30 years. And any of the component parts within the mechanicals would be at least be a lifespan of 10 years. And so the cost to renovate outweighed the cost to build. The other consideration, which we talked about under build new, is space. A lot of our elementary school sites just don't have sufficient space to build a new school while still operating the current elementary school. And so space and geographical limitations in the site itself is a consideration. It was a consideration. Will continue to be a consideration as we look at our facility. And then the build new is real important in terms of the cost of those, which is in the G6 memo to the board, which lays out. It's not just replacing the footprints that exist in those middle and elementary schools and the standalone middle schools. It's adding considerable square footage to make those buildings modern academic facilities in terms of the need for flexible classroom space, in terms of accessibility, in terms of shared spaces, cafeterias, libraries. It really is modernizing the entire facility. So those are important considerations as we went through as staff and the team in terms of the ultimate recommendations that were approved by the board. Now, Jen is going to come back on. Jen, are you there?
I am.
All right. I'm going to take you from decision making and give you your first chart, and you can just tell me when you want to advance.
Sounds good. So at the last operation work group, we heard a little question and discussion around how decisions are made. So we wanted to put together a flow chart to help demonstrate how we're seeing things lay out. So starting you on the left side of the flow chart and working our way over to the right, you'll follow time. So we voted, the board voted on the referendum questions this summer, and continuously throughout this process, we're going to be giving updates about our progress at the operation work groups. We'll be starting those community engagements this week. And then we're also going to be, as Bob mentioned, getting the Vanderwall enrollment projections coming in, the 20-year projections. And that takes us through to October. So in October, you'll have 2 fiscal 25 budgets that you will be voting on at the regular board meeting. Then from there, we will have the November 5th referenda ballot vote. And there's a couple of decisions that will go. So if we have a yes to facilities, that takes you to the top part of the flow chart. And then somewhere down the way, in that winter, the board will vote to approve and the sell and process of bond sales. And then further on down the road, way out in October of 25, the board will vote to approve the debt levy to pay the principal and the interest. Now, if at that November 5th ballot vote, if there is a no to the operations and or the facilities referenda questions, then we reevaluate. Regardless of where we're going with that vote, the community partner data and input is still going to continue to feed our forward movement as a district. We're going to still continue to update on our progress at those board operation work group meetings, and the referendum team will present an implementation plan to the board. Now I want to talk about how we got there. So if we can go to the next slide. As a reminder, so these are all slides you've seen. So we have done a lot of work to get to this spot in our process. We have done community engagement sessions several times. We have done online polls several times. We have presented the long-range facility plan. We have presented building condition reports. There's been a lot of data that has gone into this. And if we go to the next slide, we can see that here you got the community engagements going on right now. And we're moving into the next phase of the work where we're starting to build our processes to be ready if we have a successful November 5th referendum vote on the ballot. So we're bringing on the owner's rep and starting that request for proposal process, working with the architect as well to get a request for proposal process and for construction management. Later in January, we'll start working on the abatement request for proposal process. So all of those are starting to get onboarded and begun now. So if it is a successful November ballot vote, we'll be ready to roll. We can go to the next slide. And this is where we all are coming in here. So we have a lot of community engagement sessions lined up in the next month. This week, on Thursday, we have 2 back-to-back sessions. So this is our only day that we ended up having 2 at different locations. So we have Blackhawk Middle School and Gompers Elementary, and then Anana Elementary. And then going forward, you can see in the red dates, those are all dates when we have a school-specific facility open session. And then in the green, there's 4 sessions, roughly in each of our attendance areas, at community sessions where we will have a more general presentation of what's going on with the referendum. And what's going on at those would be on the next slide. So at each one of those sessions, we're gonna have a budget overview and then a very detailed discussion about the school facility itself. So that will be led by our principals who know the building inside and out. And then we'll have some dream boards. So one of the things that we know from Referendum 2020 is that it's really helpful for our community to see some ideas of what could be and what are the possibilities for their schools, either if it's a build new or a referendum, or I'm sorry, if it's a build new or a renovate. So we'll have some dream boards there. We'll get some voice from our folks who are in the room, from the community members with some active post-it noting to understand what they like and don't like about some of the facilities. And we'll also have a survey to collect information. And what we know from our previous Referendum 24 work is that the survey is a really great way to collect feedback and voice from our community, and it has worked very well to capture that. We go to the next slide. So this is an example of what a dream board could be. So on the dream board, we'll have slides that we go through with the principals, starting on your left side of the slide that show what are some options, what are some things that you could do in a school. What does it look like for a flexible and collaborative space, for example, here? And we have different categories that will walk our community through and what they might or might not think of when they're thinking of a renovated or a built new space. We'll also have some informational sheets, which you see kind of in the center there, that talk about the condition of the building and they give an overview of what's important, what we're looking for in this, and how the condition of the building was assessed. And then if you move to the right side, They'll also have an aerial view of a map that shows where the current location is of the building. And then we have an estimate of where a building could be placed in that green space to help the community understand that if we use green spaces, it might look something like this. And that's where we can get some more input from them. Next slide. The big thing to know that we really want to make sure that all of our community members leave with by the end of any one of those sessions are these numbers, these 4 points in front of you. One, we're talking about 2 sites per year. So a site can entail, one site might be a middle school and elementary school combo. Okay, so that's one site. We could have another in another location, and that would be the total of 2. So it could actually be 4 schools at once. Shovel in the ground, construction is not beginning until the spring of 2026. This relates to what Bob was talking about around the tax impacts. We're using the consideration of swing schools as an important feature to how we're approaching the Referendum 24. And that means using that green space, having another building, an older building where we can bring folks while we're building a new school or renovating. So we have the ability to move students around as needed without it being a hardship. And finally, following Referendum 20, we are focusing our first location as Shabazz High School and Sherman Middle School, and the other site will be a to be determined for that first year. Amy, I think I'm going to kick it over to you.
Oh, sorry. Second one was Black Hawk.
Hello.
And decided.
You guys hear me?
Now we can.
Excellent. A couple other notes around the green board and then go back one. Back. We have certain schools that we have proposed building new and certain schools that we have proposed renovating. So those sessions look slightly different in presentation. So Jen talked about the conceptual of build new, what that looks like. We do not have that board for the renovated spaces. We do have information about Anana and Crestwood around what the renovated costs are estimated to be, and that half of those costs are associated with infrastructure, safety and security, and accessibility. And then they have a different set of dream boards. They don't have all the dream boards that the build new schools would have. They have boards that they could consider the other 50% of what that estimated cost would be to think about what that could look like in their school. So a couple of notes, just knowing that those Crestwood and Anana sessions are going to look a little bit different. And also the feedback. The facility sessions, there will be a survey at the end and an exercise for everybody to be able to provide their input of what they like and what they don't like about their current schools. On Post-its on the dream boards, but for those open sessions, we will have a Q&A. So the community that attends those will have an opportunity to ask questions. So I just want to make sure that that was clear, because they might look a little different. So if you're coming to certain sessions, you'll understand why they look a little bit different. All right, so this is the slide I love. Bringing you guys back to our students. So there are so many pride points that I would love to shout from the rooftops, but kind of bringing you back to, there's so much to be proud of at FMSC. I'm a proud parent. I could talk about how much I love FMSC and the opportunities and successes of my kiddos in FMSC. But we have a lot to be proud of, and there's a lot of misconceptions out there and perceptions that are not always accurate. So I always want to ground people in these amazing things. We have 23 schools offer access to bilingual programs. We have 26 National Merit Scholars. We're the only district in the state of Wisconsin that has that many National Merit Scholars. We have 61% of our high schoolers earning college credit before they graduate. And if Cindy Green was here, she'd say that was a game changer. That's amazing. In the last decade, we have increased, we've doubled the amount of advanced placement tests that kids are taking. We have 27 schools that offer full day 4K program. 4K programs, full day and half day programs. And we have fifth graders that have the opportunity to learn placemates. So we have work to do, but we have so much to be proud of. And so I know we've given you lots of information, but brings back to, there's lots to be proud of. And when we talk about this, reminders of the why. All right, the ambassador toolkit that we have shared with you has grown. Back at the table, and I will pass these out in a little bit. We have posters. So please put these posters up at your grocery store, any sort of community center that you attend, your, Princeton Club, or I'm trying to think of where you might go during the day. Make sure that we're spreading that information everywhere, in all the places and spaces, wherever you go, make sure those are up. So I will give you some posters in the back of the room. We have new videos. We have a facilities video and we have an operations video of the why. And then we have a very robust social media campaign. We continue to share out all of those great points that Bob has brought up and Jen spoke out. So please share with your networks, follow us if you don't follow us, and share with your network. That's the best way to get the information out. What we can do alone is small, but what we can do as a group is tremendous. So we can do that. And another one of my favorite slides. It's bringing us back to once again to that why, because we believe in the brilliance of all of our students, all 25,000 of our students that we serve every single day. With that being said, Jen had in the slides, and I'm going to go for it. We have a little quiz. I know you guys, I don't have buttons, but we have a quiz. So there are, and before we pass out the posters, I want to make sure that I do the quiz because you'll be able to cheat if you look at the posters. We have presented several times, and I want to make sure there are 6 key points that really help guide conversations. And I know we talked about informing it against advocating, and if you stick to these 6 key points, I think the people that you have the conversation with will understand where we're at and what's at stake. So, first question. One of the front slides. What was the gap in funding that we would have received from the state due to inflation over 23 to 25? How much money did we not? Oh, look at that! Megan's writing. How much money would we have received if they would have kept up with inflation? Megan.
$30.2 million.
Excellent. All right, we're going to move on to special education. Last year alone, how much would we have received if they would have given us 100% of what I'm not saying it correctly, what they should have if they would have funded us fully. Sorry, okay.
Slightly under $1 billion, just kind of, but we spent 66.
We had to take 66 million from our general fund because that was what they did not reimburse us. You guys remember the rate of what they reimbursed us?
31%.
I love it. Excellent.
Oh, sorry.
No, this is wonderful.
All right.
She's been trying to be a trivia forever. So congrats, that's awesome.
No, you didn't.
All right, next one. How much do they reimburse us for full day 4K kiddos? Who wants to answer?
Wait, the amount or the level, the percent?
Either one.
Oh, yeah, well, it's 50%.
Excellent. They think of 4K kiddos as half a kid. All right, we're moving on to facilities.
Not very demure.
Not very demure. No, or my
Yes. Yes.
Let's go to facilities. How many of our schools are 60+ years old?
23.
Yeah,
26.
thank you.
Really?
26. All right, how many of our schools scored a C or D on the condition report? Megan?
40.
Excellent, yes.
Megan getting it.
I know, she's amazing. And how much do we spend annually on deferred maintenance?
5 million.
Oh, yeah.
Laura, way to go. All right, thank you so much. Make sure that we're, yeah, we're out of slides. Y'all did excellent, thank you.
I recap a few things.
So I thought about just a few things to share with you since we don't get a lot of time to get it up. Let's look at this slide for a minute. Some of the things we might hear is, so we're looking at what offers. I haven't really found there recently. The one I had that took a few times was Sherman Shabazz. So when you think about Sherman Shabazz and the idea that we want to build it on that parcel, imagine you live right across the street from a beautiful field, you live there, and like all of a sudden, first day, and in your front yard is going to be a giant school. So we have to think about things like that, like to these community input sessions, anyone could come. And it could be one person, that one person could be the person that's now going to look instead of the field at a brick wall right in front of their house. And that's the reality of some of this work. The flip side of that is that if we say, you know what, we're not going to replace, we are going to renovate. Then we have to take in all the input on renovating. And there are always going to be sacrifices with renovation. There just are, for budget reasons, for real reasons. You can't knock down the entire school. You just can't. And there are going to be limitations. And what ends up happening why that 60% is so important, because you start to get to a threshold, you kind of get to your maximum, and you look at the scope of work and you're like, that's all we can say. Oh, it's still a lot. That's all that we're going to be able to touch in the school. And there are going to be sacrifices, which is the real opportunity when you get to that kind of cost. In addition, because we have such great spaces like this in the city, we are able to do those construction projects. We are able to build new while school is in session across the way. I left, just so you know, I left a site like this in St. Paul, Bruce Montiel Elementary School, built on a slope, built many years ago. To replace that on a slope that is going to fail again, you wouldn't do that. So instead, that school is being built right now on a green space with a shovel in the ground. The sacrifice, parking is a sacrifice. The playground is a fence around what's left of the playground, so it's minimal. But the fact that students and staff will have 2 less years of that kind of construction site because of this, the sacrifice is worth it. And it's going to be a completely renovated school that is a community school. It's going to have a community space. It's going to have a laundry room. It's going to have a home good storage for families to come and access those kinds of materials. We didn't build schools like this in the 60s. We just did. So the opportunity to replace is one that's a little bit unique. You also heard Bob talk about swing spaces. I think it was swing schools. I'd like to clarify, are we going to call it swing school or swing space?
Probably swing school.
So that school here, is it swing space or is it a swing school? We'll get clarified on that. Swing space is in older models of doing this work. It was called outposting students. You outpost a section or a school so that you could renovate or close down a section of the school for whatever purpose, asbestos or in this case, we would be saying that in one of our vacated schools, so for example, let's say we build the new school right here, and we leave the existing school, and that existing school that's there now, though it's older and we've deemed it, we want to replace this, it still could be a viable opportunity to move a school that has decent proximity to that space while we construct, the next building. Could be an option. Now, I want to be very careful in saying that because you know how this works. You start putting things out there, you start declaring an order, and that order is based on a swing space. But then you find out, you know what? We didn't check into the bus routes to access that swing space. By doing so, we realize this won't be as easy as we thought. It will cost more. There might not be enough buses, are going. So we have to be very cautious. And as we're talking about this, we are putting ideas on the table. We are putting broad concepts on the table for us to get public interest, public support, and then have to make decisions and do that in conjunction with the three partners that we talked about hiring. The architects, the design folks, the construction managers, and ultimately the builders. The building group that's going to come to the work. So I just want you to know that, you know, we don't want to walk away from here making promises other than the one. I'll ask a trivia question. What is the one decision that we made from the start of these projects? What would be the first second? Shabazz and Sherman. That's really all that we've kind of come out with and said, this is where we're going to start. But everything else is really to be determined. You know, it's based on a lot of different factors. So I just want to add just a little bit more to that. The replace versus renovate, I think, is a really unique opportunity that we have in the cost of these projects too. For every bit that we wait to do these projects, the costs are just going to go up more and more, especially in renovation. Renovate anything. Some of you maybe been through this. You think it's going to cost $1,000 and you get an estimate for $25,000. And you're like, really? I can do that. That's really how it works in school. Questions? Thoughts?
So my first question is really a question I got from media recently, which is when you look at all the schools that have C's, are there any schools that you all thought about that you didn't include in kind of this first or initial group of schools you want to work with? So yeah, what was the criteria for one school to be selected versus another?
Bob, I'll let you talk about this, but essentially we're kind of in the middle school grouping now. And these, if I'm not mistaken, have rated out the lowest of that group, of that subgroup.
Yeah, and that's correct. Our focus was middle schools, mechanicals, both mechanical HVAC and mechanical plumbing, and then geographic location and green space availability. When we started doing the numbers, renovated building.
Were there any specific ones that were mentioned?
So I think because we have a couple schools that are two schools, White Horse, oh gosh, Shank, I'm sorry. White Horse Shank does not have a great rating as a building at this point, is my understanding, and is not included.
We don't have a full list of it.
No, but it's on.
To not.
So I think there was an undertone that if you do an middle school at the same time, a building like White Horse Shank, why wouldn't you prioritize it, given the development in that immediate area and nation of students or those two buildings? One building.
And again, I think these are apt to come out during this work. Can't do them all at the same time. You're not saying that. The community understands that too, but then how are we making those priority decisions? And White Horse, you're right, White Horse Shank are not in this next batch. And Bob, I would guess that in looking at the facility conditions report, they didn't rank up high enough in addition to the geography. When you look at this map, board members. When you look at this map too, trying to stay somewhat geographically representative as well. It's easy when you do the 4 high schools, right? So that naturally worked out, but this map, as you can see, we really try to address some in each feeder area as well to the extent possible.
The factors we considered is like the intensity of need at the building itself and the geographic representation of the city. Let's do these updates. Second question is, my understanding is that it's always better for the environment to recycle what you bought. And so if we have this huge commitment to the environment and then we say we're gonna schools that impact our ship to and how do the geothermal HVAC and things that allow us to
And Bob, I'll turn it over to you. I don't know that we're in that design. One thing I will say about the opportunity though to replace on a site, it does give you the idea or the opportunity to map out in a different way that existing green space, whether it be porous parking lot or rain gardens or things of that nature. So there is some ability to do some different site work. But I'm not sure if we have it down on the recycle and the geothermal.
Yeah, I was trying to find the shank white horse. So shrimp for.
Oh, thank you. Looking into Shank White.
What was the question?
So.
I could tell you the Shank White Horse was an overall composite grade of a C.
So it's just not a D and everything else is pretty.
Well, it all factors into the overall grade of a C. There were some Bs, there were some Cs, there were some Ds in there. So, but it overall came up to a C. And if you wanted to see the specifics, you can look on page 21 of the condition facility report.
Thank you so much, Jen.
Yeah, you're welcome.
The question Joe kind of pivoted to you was the second question I was asking, which is really my understanding is that it's always better for the environment that you invite, like, use what you want, right? Building has a impact. So how do we talk about building new versus remodeling and the environmental impact of not recycling like we already and then how do we talk about kind of adding things like geothermal, HVAC, and other sustainable aspects?
Yeah, I think that would be site specific. I mean, if you take a look at Shank and Shabazz, I think there's some component people in that school, you're like, yeah, this isn't as old as 1928 could be, but there comes to a point where, I mean, that facility is just needs to be built new, right? It's just past its useful life. And then the other thing I can't stress enough is when you start looking at some of the designs, 3D boards about classrooms that were built 70 years ago and even 60 years ago are not classrooms that for modern education standards, right? They don't exist. They're not created. They were never created to STEM or arts infusion at middle school level. They just want.
So I really love that answer, Bob, because I think the idea that you're creating spaces that really are meant for an instruction based in the future that advantages the student of this moment is deeply compelling and really centers the needs of our young people. I think in terms of sustainability of it, I hope we can continue to flesh out what that conversation should sound. All voted in favor of that goal.
Okay, we're just kind of talking now.
Blair, and then I saw Megan too. Yep, go ahead, Blair.
Okay, so the thing that's been sticking with me, and I think this is kind of to what you were just bringing up. And I know this is like a me thing. Based on my experiences of teaching in 2019, this tiny little classroom at West High School, which is hot and cramped, with new furniture. Like we're like, oh, we're gonna get new furniture. It's pathways budget, all this cool stuff. Like, I know that amazing educational experiences can happen anywhere. I know this. We know this. I know that students deserve purpose-built classrooms that are for now and for the future and are going to really serve the students that we have now and in the future. Like I see on the materials, right? Like this facilities investment is an instructional investment. The thing that I keep like having agita about is like, where's the matching plan for what it takes to use those spaces, right? To do arts integrated collaborative planning is hugely time intensive. It just is, right? There's no way around that, but like having lots of planning time and lots of flexibility. And so I'm like, and I know I'm not the only person who feels that. I know that that lots of people will have this question, like, cool, new spaces are nice. What's the change for making cool new stuff happen in those cool new stuff, new places? And so that's kind of what I'm sitting with presently. And that's the thing that it keeps coming up for me. I just put that in, is there an answer? I don't think so. Like, I'll stop now.
Can I,
So, is it okay that I facilitate?
sure, sorry.
I saw Megan.
I had a couple of questions, some of which I've received from students and some of which like I just have for context, especially for this Friday. So the 4 comprehensive high schools, were those all renovated or some built to be
Renovated, however, there was some brand new space, like if you look at, we showed the drone video last night, that showed the Memorial Music Wing, that was brand new, that didn't exist.
Same with east. And west.
The pool, you're right, that section, what is it, the pool, that was brand new. Yep.
They all have it.
And the hallway along region 2 spaces over there.
And then, I mean, I was like 8th grade freshman when, you know, this was being talked about for the last referendum. But how was student voice incorporated into, you know, the designs for these buildings, and how is that going to happen? Like, should this pass in November? Or are these community sessions that we're having now, like, is that the space that students should be like prioritizing?
I wasn't here for 2020, but for this current one, I've been very clear to staff that, yes, these are the kind of the opening to come out the dream boards. But there will be a level of specificity. There'll be additional meetings where there will be time to gather groups. You know, once we get the approval to do it. So that will take care of that. And I want to go back real quick if I could, Blair, your question about essentially the way I interpret it is we are now creating flexible, personalized learning spaces in so many ways. It's one example. I remember this comment in 2014, when the district I was in passed a referendum. We were now 1-to-1 technology. Teacher said upon getting their Chromebook, this is great. My students in the back of the room will be able to see their phone. So kind of to your point, that's great to them, but not really the intent of how we're going to use these new spaces, these new flexible rooms. So it took a hell of a lot of meeting. It took a lot of rescheduling. It took a lot of collaboration time that was teacher-led, not administrative-driven. And it's not going to happen overnight for some. For some, they've been begging for it and probably doing it in the spaces that they have. But I do think for a system to change, there's no doubt it will take time, but it should be a real accelerant. It should be something that excites people to do it.
My concern is not that people won't want to provide a quality of instruction that matches the quality of these new facilities. My fear is that we don't have I feel an anxiety about knowing the contours of the plan to make that collaboration possible. Is how I feel.
Well, actually, let's get this noted, talk with Cindy, team about that, and personalized learning folks as well. You know, at least putting out the vision for that or successful work that's already taking place.
Thanks.
Nikki, and then Sagan, did you?
No, sorry.
Sagan, back to Holly.
I want to answer Blair's question, actually. I agree with you. We need to use the spaces better, 100%, and we need to put resources in that 100%. My issue on it and why I think for the 507 and why we need to stress it is because right now we have certain schools like Blackhawk, for example. I'm just using the example that is not 100% accessible.
Oh, to be clear, I'm.
No, I know, I agree with you. I'm adding to,
Okay.
I want to raise you up, but I don't know if I'm doing it right.
I got it. Yeah, no, I want it. I'm just like,
No, you brought up an excellent point, and I want to figure out how we can utilize the two together.
Yeah.
How do we show, and maybe we could add that to the discussion, how do we show how we can utilize it for each person. How do we put that into the questions? Because it's an essential point, because people need to know where the things are, how the things are. This explains our value better than anything else. So I do think it's important. So I wanted to uplift it, not criticize it.
I actually wanted to back on that. The slide deck and what we just presented to you was missing actually a really key element. And I apologize for that. Our previous sessions, we incorporated it it's in all of our information sessions. Those 4 key priorities for teaching and learning and how those are leading, this work. And so Cindy does a fantastic job. Carletta has done a fantastic job at previous sessions around those four key teaching and learning aspects and how they're integrated in this work forward. So I want to first apologize for that not being included. It is in all the other sessions. And then I also wanted to comment, and Megan, I had a fantastic time. We worked on videos for 3 days last week about 2020, the referendum, and it's a highlight reel of all the amazing new students we had. We also had an opportunity to interview all kids from every single school, and they reflected a lot on, what does this look like for them? What are we hoping to improve? And we had some fantastic interviews and feedback, and Megan actually was one of them, about how these spaces have transformed their experience and transformed the culture and climate at their school. And so I also want us to not lose sight of that tremendous shift for 2020 for those schools that were impacted, but what that shift looks like in these other 10 schools. So I just wanted to share that with the group.
Remember Mulger Ventures?
Yeah, I do think there's an opportunity to talk about the operating side of the referendum as part in terms of how these two referendums work. I also think that when you have the state narrative that there is declining enrollment and you have a certain level of confusion about whether or not we're deficit spending, especially when we have kind of flagged we're in declining enrollment, we're not flag that we're deficit spending and we're actually adding to our fund balance. And so I do think like talking about what we're prioritizing within operating and why that's a necessary thing to pass at a time when, I think the average person is pretty hurt by inflation is something I think I'd like to see us spend a little bit more time on. I do think that we have disproportionately engaged in the conversation around facilities and at the same level of excitement around our operating referendum.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. You show pictures of buildings, it's hard to show pictures of operating. If we're not intentional about it.
I mean, if the investment in operating is really about our workforce, I do think there's a way to photograph some what they mean to us. And I also think that's more complicated in terms of representing the funding cliff and, where we're at and why that is a necessary investment from the community. But I think to Blair's point, there is a part of that operating that is about our equity projects, that is about full day 4K, that is about making sure people have, that is about making sure we can effectively staff the district in order to make sure, right? Like if you have state-of-the-art equipment and you don't have a certified educator to facilitate the class in that room, what a waste, right? What a missed opportunity. And so I don't know exactly how to turn that into a talking point. But I do think that there's some space there to really kind of fall in love with what we are trying to do holistically and how these two referendums reinforce one another.
Yeah. Amy, maybe part of the dream board would be a segment on the dream board in terms of facility on what the long range sustainable vision would be for our workforce, would be for, the opportunities that we want to provide in the spaces. Maybe that would be a good place for us to kind of make it a Venn diagram, like where do those two things come together? Say
That's how when we present the dream boards, we are gonna talk about how why those spaces are necessary for that, so, yeah, definitely. Great point. And then to speak to how we talk about that operational and I feel like you're setting up a really great segue for us because, that's next. Those are the messages that you're gonna start highlighting and talking about our staff. And so that we have a calendar, set up for the messaging and that's what's hitting next, so. For that.
I do think there's areas in which like what we've done prior to. Person used to build trust. In terms of how we plan to sources, a commitment to a living wage, a investment in the people. Bring these opportunities to life for our young people.
Jen just shared a chat with me. Jen's not only our project manager for this work, but also leading our Grow Your Own initiatives for associates and for the principals that she just shared. We could interview some of the Grow Your Own participants as part of the operations discussion. We're investing in high quality. Jen had shared with me last week that most of the folks that have been selected for the Grow Your Own Associate have just contacted Jen and have just said how excited they are, how thankful they've got this opportunity. That'd be a great set of interviews. Definitely focus on staff.
Especially when some of our Grow Your Owns, like the beauty of it is that we're removing the barrier of them going back to school because they're able to focus on school and not so much. So I think that's really important.
Our residency.
Yes.
I want to, and I need to spend a little bit of time on the numbers so we can understand it and because it is difficult, right? We have a bigger fund balance than we were budgeting in 23-24 and beginning, which is a very positive thing, right? Gives us some more flexibility as we move into regardless of the success. But it's really important to point out all the better ending balance does from 24 into 20 is create a one-time stream of revenues. The referendum is a sustainable base revenues that are there to be investment in their staff. Better condition statements, one-time dollars. You spend it once and you don't have it. It's great that our actual expenditures are less than budgeted, increases our available revenues, but it's one time. So it's good, but it's a big difference between.
I had a question about just shifting gears a little bit, but it made me think about it when Blair asked about like the plan and how we're reimagining spaces, how they work together. It got me thinking about when touring some of the school districts like the 21st century schools, like kind of like what does a 21st century like? And these are the things that are part, and these are the parts of the curriculum and such, and that kind of match into those spaces, the reimagining of like what things look like. And so I wonder like we're also kind of thinking about that as we are developing, but more so along opportunities if we do have to build new, like looking into like a high school of the arts or like a tech school or something like that, where it's more focused on maybe an area. So I'm also thinking about, as we are talking about declining enrollment, how the population, Dane County is the largest growing. How do we ensure that we are competing with some of our school districts around us, since we do have the opportunity possibly to build new? How are we being innovative in that way? So we're not just, again, rebuilding a school, but how are we kind of taking the innovative piece to that? Not to say that we have to have something concrete tonight, but just what are the
conversations and thoughts that I guess that we're having.
There are some opportunities Bob shared with me right before the meeting. We had 400 students come into MMSD and about 1,000 leave, so a net loss of 600. So one might wonder, what could we do to possibly retain? One other thing, two other things I want us to think about. I'm all for having these choices about, I won't say the M word, magnetizing the district. But that's kind of what it means. Not only is it competition from external, it does create internal competition too, so we have to be very thoughtful
Right,
about
absolutely.
controlling that, just to make sure that we're not, one side of town or one school, and we're leaving another to go with.
Absolutely.
I do think that strategic planning does give us the opportunity to, the reality of it, but we need to go into a focused strategic planning session regardless. But could we create 21st century portrait of a graduate, or whatever we want to call it, to really set our North Star on this is what every child, young person leaving MMSD could be, should be, and have exposure to. So it does, I think, dovetail really nicely. I just don't want to get, I mean, I don't know what that is today. I want to be thoughtful and engage with our community so we can really set that as our aspirations. That now have sustainable funding to do it. There's nothing worse than saying it's what we want to do. We got 6, give us that green light.
Yeah, because I mean, even after, I won't say after COVID, because COVID's still here. But after like the shutdown, like that was like a lot of the conversations, like how can we be creative and think outside the box with instruction and what kind of investments can we make? And so this is just another way to kind of think of that. So we might have the resources to update things, and it'd be cool to kind of see some things happening that.
And at this time right now, the workforce is scrambling and they're having these same conversations in colleges, 4-year colleges especially. One of my closest friends is a longtime college 4-year administrator, and we had a conversation this weekend. We're struggling with what's our identity now? We have the pledge, so we let everyone in, but we can't afford it. We cap Wisconsin students at UW Medicine at 3,500. Well, that's repeat that you didn't hear from me. So there's some things that they're struggling with, how they really are. And yet they have a record, they have no housing or that are this weekend. So good time for MMSD to be really seen as vocal leaders in this work. We have such a strong opportunity to generate, this outward vision.
Then I guess my last question, just how are we utilizing our colleges and universities in the area to be able to come alongside us as well and kind of developing these spaces as we are thinking about possibilities or innovation.
I'll be very brief with this. Love the STEM Academy, love it. But I struggle with having a student lose their high school identity by having to leave their campus. I just do. It's a bias that I hold. I'll admit that, everyone. My idea of removing barriers to equity is to create those spaces in your school. Labs and spaces that look like the industry or like college, and bring those certified and community experts into the building, offered right there. Say that there's no reason why a student from that zip code, this one with this educated parent or not a parent, student, too many times, all those access barriers are like, whether we think we're solving it or not, we're leaving some kids pushing on. So I think it could be a combination. I'm not saying that we would eliminate all campus from this experiences, but let's look at, especially with our new spaces. I mean, it's nicer than a lot of K-16 facilities.
So I have a real nuts and bolts question, but I'm really sucked into the beautiful conversation we're having right now, and I don't want to end it.
No, it's
the only thing I want to add to this piece of it is I would love to see us looking at how, as we're developing these spaces, we're really literally and figuratively making space to bring the community in to our schools, super intentionally. So I just want to add that into the conversation.
It's a great point. How many of you have been to Beth Hills Memorial since it's reopened? So it's one of the first things I noticed. We had a new teacher orientation there last Tuesday, right? Our lunch last Tuesday.
All week.
And all week you walk in and the first thing I noticed is bright, open, and a place for everybody. So it's one example of that, where schools built in the 60s. No, let's create that space in the middle and shoehorn everyone in. It's tight, it's dark. So this has given us the opportunity to really build these kinds of spaces that are accessible. We still have to do some work about how one feels in that space. And the space is definitely, I believe, it is far more supportive.
I appreciate that. I think that when I think about a long-term vision for our district, and solving some of these problems that have been going on for 40 years, it's going to take our whole community. And so having that space within our schools feels critical.
Or another example is East High School. I met with Rossi United, the Latino student group in May. And there's a whole room at East that the students, they say they fought for to make sure it was theirs, where they could have their student clubs, groups meet. It is a room it's not a classroom, it's bigger than a classroom. It has a counter for food. It has lights, all the AV you would want, and the students really feel like that's their space. There's comfortable seating, there's high top tables, there's soft furniture, and there's tables. So very much a flexible space, and that's where they held their group that day. So I think those two are opportunities where students really have a say in, this is our space.
Beautiful. Okay.
They got rid of the pit.
It is gone. So is C-17, by the way.
Yes, it
Wow.
is.
They filled it in. Leave it.
Never thought it would happen.
Okay, so here's my nuts and bolts question. It's a budget question, I believe, and a logistics question.
Jen
probably.
becomes.
So if we're leaving up the existing building as swing schools or swing spaces, we are currently, I believe, budgeting into this referendum, the facilities referendum, the cost of demolition for those spaces.
Correct.
And if we're only using the authority to which we need at any given time, if those spaces stay up for longer than this 4-year period, what happens to the funding that we would need after that 4-year period in order to do that demolition, clean the space, and then remodel it?
Great question. The $507 million voters will approve gives the board the authority to sell general obligation bonds for $507 million. There's no limitation on when those bonds. So, and you can only sell bonds to pay for the cost of the referendum question, which includes demolition. So if the demolition doesn't happen until year 6, then you wouldn't sell bonds to year 6 to pay for that demolition. So it's there to do the project as the voters approved, which includes demolition to those 10 school buildings, well, 8 school buildings.
Well, Laura, let's say after 10 years that we only spent $468 million. Okay, we kind of close out this portion. And then we go to our voters again to say, now we would like to fund the next 10 schools, just using 10 as an example. We used $468 million. It was $22 a month. We told you it would be 27. And now with these 10 schools, it's 512 would be our maximum. I think it would be a way for us to say in the next line of projects, that next batch of projects, we would have to determine that space. Is it going to be demoed or is it going to continue to be used? So it would be factored into that as well. Possibly.
So I think I just heard you saying different answers to that question. So one was that we would have that authority under the original referendum to use that funding for the demolition, and the other is that we would leave that on the table because it's not within that time frame, but we would then include it in a future.
The way it's currently written, any facility that we would replace has the cost of demolition in it, in the 507. But if we don't do that demo, we likely won't spend 507 million. It would reduce the cost. You know, because there wouldn't be the demolition of the site work.
So is there any scenario in which we keep these spaces so that we have the additional flexibility within the district for an extended period of time, and then we no longer have the funds to remove them when it's time to do so?
No. The 507 million gives you authority to sell bonds for the question. Remember when we did the final question? It's those 10 sites plus we have for other maintenance and facility improvements, right? Gave ourselves an open-ended. But that 507 million can only be used for the wording of that specific question. And the question has demolition, so that money will be there to fund demolition whenever that demolition happens.
Where it becomes challenging is if you wait, and we wouldn't do this for 20 years. What demolition costed 20 years ago won't be us. And so there's inflation where these don't automatically adjust to inflation. So there's some time bonus to this.
Okay, can you explain the tax impact then related to when those bonds are issued?
Good question. So, the bonds are, we structure our bonds for 20 years, 20-year payback, principal and interest, 20 years to pay back money that we sell. So we will, right now, the 507 is scheduled to be sold in installments of 4, depending on what the specifics happen, that can change. And so once they're sold, we have to pay back principal and interest every year. That's what would be the levy you would approve in 2020, right? It's whatever that principal and is, which is gonna be about like about 30 million dollars. Chris, over the 23 years to pay back 507 million. So that principal and interest payment is what we'd have to pay every year, and that's what we'd have to.
Okay, so I'm almost there now. So.
Ask a question.
I know I can't be the only person that has these questions, so I'm gonna keep
Answered
going.
mine.
So so we're saying that we have the authority for the 500, or that we would, if that's what's voted on. And then we don't use it. How, when those bonds are issued, are we still, so are we requesting that full amount? We're not requesting the full amount. So are we requesting it in segments each year? Okay.
We won't do it. We won't. It costs us money every time we go to market to sell bonds. We're only allowed to sell bonds for a period when we know we're gonna have costs. The word is arbitrage. It's federal arbitrage. We can't sell bonds, make interest on that money. We can only sell bonds to pay costs. So we have to document, we're gonna have these costs coming up in the next year. Sell 100 million of that 507, that 100 to pay our contractors, our architects, every 100 million, sell bonds on the market, get the 100 million, pay our bills. And when we look to the next year after that, what's gonna be coming due, what are our costs? We need to sell some to cover those costs. We're restricted on that.
So if we get to the end of year 4 and we've decided to keep some of our buildings in place because that gives us additional flexibility, we're not using the authority within the 4-year period of time. And you're saying that we're able to stretch that out until we want to use it. And so can you connect that to the tax impact in any individual year for a taxpayer?
Yeah, so one, there is no limitation on year span for for debt referendum question, the 507 million. There's no length of time to spend 500. You have authority to sell $507 million in bonds over whatever period, as long as you are doing the projects specified by the voters, approved by them. So the tax impacts are, if we don't levy, if we don't sell bonds for 507 million, we're only gonna pay back 400 million. We'll only do principal and interest to pay back 400 million. And we never sell the remaining 107. But I do know the question is broad enough for us to, we have a roof fail at one school building in the next 3 years, we will be able to, if you choose to, some of that authority to do that project, right? Now, be very careful because I want us to do the 10 schools, right? So I would say it's for the 10 schools, right?
Okay, got it. Thank you.
The way that fancy word arbitrage.
Yep.
I wouldn't spell that. But another way to think about it is pay as you go. Sometimes there's terms pay and go. Pay as you go. So you have a maximum or you have a, maximum allowed, and you have a draw schedule. So you're creating a bond sales schedule and you're drawing money to pay for projects as you create them, as you do them, as the work is done.
As long as we're in the detail, can I add a little bit? So, because when we were talking about, our recommendation is, very strong recommendation is we start with Shabazz and Shabazz, obviously high school. When we gave you that June 6th memo, we did have to pick an order of those schools in terms of come online, because we needed to estimate a draw schedule that we then needed to know when would we sell the bonds, which I needed to know, come up with a interest on the levy. So technically, there is it's an estimate right now. I'll say, so you know that, right? So Nikki was saying, Blackhawk Gompers is next. If you look at our.
You speak up.
Oh, if you look at that June 6th memo, there's a construction, a build out schedule, and we do have an order of those 10 buildings, right? That is not set in stone, right? You get to decide based on our public input, what do you want to start with? So it can change. And what will change is, depending on the project and the cost. Now, the middle school elementary combos are about the same in cost, no matter where they're located. So it shouldn't change all that much in the grander scheme of things. But there is an order out there, just so you know. And then secondly, Megan and Blair, you were talking about, is there time to get additional input and remember, we're only gonna do 2 sites a year, and we're not gonna start construction until spring of 2026. So it's fully intention that we're gonna be interviewing staff and families once we pick the school sites we're gonna work on. Start in spring of 2026. Between now and then, we have all kinds of time to get input about the specificities of those plans that will be put into place, right? And then we don't have to start that next conversation to the next couple of schools a year and a half from now, or we can start it right away on all of them, but we really just need to make decisions. 2 school sites. For spring of 2026. So the plan really does allow for robust input from the community. Good. Good plan. They all have a good plan.
Like we have kind of an input session. Be following up with people on the other side of the referendum. So like if folks meet with us and say, here are the things we're hoping for, here are questions, is there any embedded follow-up with maybe whether in terms of when it was?
You bet. We're utilizing, Let's Talk. There's a form on the referendum page. We're getting quite a few. I mean, I probably 3 or 4 a day. So yes.
So yes, we're getting feedback right now, and then we do have a plan for that, for staying engaged with those folks post the vote.
Definitely.
It's great to hear.
And it's great too, because a lot of those are informing FAQs that we're putting together. So it's really helpful. For both sides. We've engaged, a lot of the conversations actually don't continue with just one answer. They come back with additional questions. It's a lively conversation and engagement.
If board members do doors or write op-eds in support of the referendums, do we need to, how do you want us to make you aware of that as an administration? Or does that go beyond what you all should be involved with? So I'm seeing you say you all should get the heads up. And then should we be sending stuff like that to you all to proof and make sure it's accurate, basically? Okay.
Yes.
Yes.
And coordinate with the foundation too. I mean, I noticed today, you know, McFarland just approved their question last Monday, and 2 just kind of random op-eds in the Cap Times, fine, but again, to be a little bit more strategic, I think can be really benefit us.
Yeah, so I was reached out to by the city to collaborate with them on how you're gonna navigate the November ballot. And I'm wondering if the administration is also coordinating with the city to have a more information-based approach to both referendums.
Yeah, TJ and I talked today to the mayor and her chief of staff, and I think right now we are possibly thinking about how we could do a session with the council and they could do a session with you all.
Okay.
We don't know what that looks like, or, but we're just talking about different opportunities.
Really appreciate you all highlighting your collaboration.
I was gonna say with that stuff too, the folks at the foundation and Spectre Row have been really helpful.
Yeah, if you all are hearing things that just don't sound right, that to us, for example, I'm meeting with. There were some hurt feelings on some union contract works on last high school renovations, so I'm meeting with regional union leads this week with Spectre Row. So you're right, Savion, they are a good partner. Got their ear to the ground and they're well versed in political campaigns and relationships.
Any further questions or discussion items? Megan.
Since a weird question relating to our schools that were renovated in the last 4 years. Was trauma informed? I'm not sure if you know that off the top of your head.
I actually,
You-
when we looked at the school and did this with parents of disability, parents of kids with disabilities and individuals with disabilities, we specifically asked, not just on trauma informed, we asked individuals, both disabled and non, whether it be colors that were better, but also are there spaces that students can go? That was specific. Additionally, what we did is we brought the architect along with the designer and actually brought a wheelchair to show him where the ramps were inaccessible and made him do that as well to make sure, but it was discussed. It wasn't as much as I would like, but it was discussed. I was on those courses.
Can I follow up that question? So I happen to work in an organization that has remodeled all of our spaces using that philosophy. And I am wondering, is our architect versed in that? And has that been brought to their attention? Because it is really important.
We don't have them.
Yeah.
That RFP is gonna go out, but as part of Joe's advisory, one part of the group we met, Joe had an advisory committee, and we talked about the members on that talked about wanting to be part of that design, that they want more than just what the architect, they want to be able to go through and look at the plans and be able to walk through the buildings and say, this is really what needs to be. And
and I've talked to the members and said, that's, yeah, I definitely have that part of our conversation.
Right, so and the way that I understand trauma-informed spaces is in addition to what Nikki is talking about as far as accessibility, it's also about, you know, places that feel safe. That have specific elements that help folks feel comfortable, whereas there's other architectural elements that work to a person's disadvantage if they've experienced trauma. So it's a different level of architectural design.
We discussed that with like, the paint colors, especially whether certain ones would be triggering to certain people, whether or not also if certain spaces could have certain, the water, nearer to water, not near to water and stuff like that, or near window access, but we didn't go into as much depth as you and I would like.
So hopefully that's on the radar.
The good news is that working with these firms who, I mean, they're doing this work all over the country. We live in a place that is rich with some great experts, so they will likely be able to provide us exposure to just about anything that's important to us.
Or work in RFP for the to see if the next firm.
Okay, so to kind of bring tonight to a close, if that's okay. We kind of heard tonight the presentation that will be kind of led by the administration at the community engagement sessions. I think all of us are signed up for at least one of those. So what I would say is, when I've tried to go to these in the past, and hopefully you will too, not only are you like listening for the questions that are coming up in space and the comments, but also finding your own way of being able to like talk about the facts. You know what I mean? Like, not that you're presenting that night, but that you also are finding your way of being able to talk about this referendum. And so, you know, in the space, you'll have to find the approach that works for you best. I always try to be like kind of listening, taking my own notes, and then as questions are coming up, I'm also jotting the questions and hearing how administration is responding, so that I can also try to start to internalize my own way of being talk about this if I were approached in a grocery store or something like that. So hopefully the engagement sessions will provide an opportunity to help us internalize more the way that we're going to talk about this. We have the posters, so we're being asked to help put these up in our favorite places and spaces to help promote the information. I think Ali's question was really good. So if we are deciding that we want to write an op-ed, please write it and let the administration know. And TJ, should you be the primary contact for that? At our June retreat, we had also talked about kind of canvassing or knocking doors, or, you know, kind of starting to be more boots on the ground involved. What I have in my notes is that we would try to coordinate that with the foundation, because they would also be developing materials. So I can reach out to them to see if they're starting to organize folks. I'm not exactly sure that they've, you know, they have all of that laid out yet, and then we can get that information to each other. Can I just ask before we close, do we each want to be able to just take media inquiries as they come in? If they're like referendum related, because, you know, certain media like reaching out to certain board members, do we each want to be able to, you know, kind of state our opinion, or do we want to direct it to anybody? How do we want to proceed moving forward? Yeah, Ali.
So I really appreciate this question. I'd like to be strategic and within messaging. So my approach has been, if I'm being interviewed, then I'm speaking for myself as an individual board member. If they want something that is the board's unified perspective, then that's coming from you, and like any explanation of kind of the cadence of decision making, I'm pointing folks at you. Does that feel like good to you?
Yeah, that's fine.
The other
100%
thing
agree.
I would really love to do actively, which is some kind of press conference related to whether we win, whether we win or lose, or whether it passes or fails, some kind of moment with the media. And then another event related to early voting. So when voting starts, I know we can't tell people how to vote. We absolutely can tell people to vote, and that benefits us in this process. And so having some strategy of awareness for our students, our faculty, and the greater community around early voting and when it starts is something I'd like us to have a strategic effort as a group around.
What is that day?
47 days before the election.
I just looked at the date the other day. Early voting starts
Yeah.
relatively
It's really
soon. Really,
It's a good thing to do, like in partnership with the city, in partnership with the county clerk's office. But I think making sure that we're highlighting like voting in and of itself proactively with the media, whether we're sending out a statement that is a letter from the board in its entirety, and I'm happy to work behind the scenes with you, Nichelle, on anything we want to generate.
Right.
So I appreciate that idea. I mean, I think that speaking only for ourselves and letting the board president speak for all of us is really the way that we generally operate, and I appreciate.
I think that makes, sorry, cut you off, Lisa, Laura. My brain is fried. I apologize, but Laura, thank you. I really appreciate that, the way we do it. I agree with it. On the letter, as long as we could see it before it goes out.
Oh, yeah.
Then I have no problem with it whatsoever.
Okay.
So the only thing I would add is that I think it could be to our advantage to come up with a calendar for op-eds.
Okay.
So that we're looking week or something like that, and rotating who's writing them. Maybe we can flip that with some community members that the foundation is gonna, I'm sure, pull together.
Yeah. I like that. Megan?
I know. about this a while ago, but Student Senate is gonna try to do a couple of. November. We don't
Right.
have the exact dates, but Claire Lee, the president.
Yeah, I can help with that. So early voting is 14th election. Second through third, however, absentee ballot, I'm waiting for that spot. So.
Yep.
Friends on deck.
Okay, so I feel like coming out of tonight, we can probably start to mobilize around some proactive actions that we can take, because we've been in getting the information from the administration, and thank you all for all of your thoughtfulness. But I know we also have a role to play, and so we need to move into a more active stance, I think. And so we will do that.
Right.
All right, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. So, Vice President Pearson made the motion, I think,
So,
and
Second.
Nikki Vandermeulen has seconded. Okay, and all those in favor of adjournment. All right. Does everybody give me a hands up? Okay, great. Thank you. And Megan. Yeah. Thank you. We are adjourned.
So absentee ballots will